Good morning. It's Friday morning. It's 7:30-ish. I still haven't got that video thing quite right, but one day I'll get there. Turns out you now need a Twitter private, a Twitter whatever it is to stream to Twitter. Well, that's what it seems to
Twitter
be
whatever
saying.
it is.
Yeah, or X or whatever it is. Anyway, good morning. Welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics. Today we will mostly be discussing coffee, buses, and politics. No, so we've got we're going to try to do another rapid fire episode to do. So we've got four things to talk about. We're going to be talking about the Cambridgeshire County Council Poverty Commission. I almost dread to say this for the reaction that it may cause. Mill Road and a certain bridge. The Conservative leadership, and an article from Sam Friedman on mayors that I just thought raised a whole load of really interesting issues. So where should we start? Should we start with Mill Road?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So explain to a non-motorist who rarely goes to Cambridge. What's Mill Road?
Yeah, I'm somebody who rarely drives to Cambridge these days. Mill Road is well, you describe Mill Road, Alex, because it's closer to you than it is to me. But it's a funky little corner of Cambridge, isn't it? With lots of independent shops and restaurants, is how I describe it.
I actually used to live many years ago when I was still a student and living in Cambridge. I used to live on one of the side streets just off Mill Road. So I've been, not now, but maybe like 8 years ago or so, quite a lot on that road. Yes, it's a road full of restaurants, shops, various shops, both independent and non-independent shops. And really a place which is really known for its different like international culture as well. Many different like restaurants and international shops as well. But what's really interesting about Mill Road is that the debate on whether to close Mill Road Bridge to traffic or some form of traffic has been going on forever. In fact, I was seeing some of the news articles from over like 30 plus years ago, saying how councils at the time debated making Mill Road more cyclist and pedestrian friendly. So what's happening now, just putting context, has been in the debate for a long time, but I think it's now in year 2024 where this has finally reached its final decision, which Stephen participated in the county council.
Yeah, so it shut for a while during COVID, didn't it? Because during COVID, lots of cash became available, and the county council decided to put in a temporary restriction in and shut it, which was, depends on which side of the argument you are, but lots of people thought it was really successful. I think then they tried to turn that temporary restriction into a permanent restriction. Yeah, which I'd agree was slightly unfair, because if you're going to do something as a temporary restriction, something making it permanent isn't really very fair. And so it's bounced back and forward since then, and I think it went to the courts, and I think the protesters against it won a legal appeal. As somebody who doesn't live in Cambridge and doesn't visit very often, and like Mill Road has never been a huge part of my life. I think I've been, I deliberately went because I was taking this decision, but it's not something I've experienced very much. So this has been basically bouncing around for as long as Alex and I have been councillors, and because I don't live there, I've just avoided it, because like it's actually none of my business. But when it came down to making the decision, because it's been going for so long and so many people had expressed views of it for it. So I'm not normally in highways and transportation, but lots of people are counting themselves out of the debate, kind of predetermining themselves. And so they had to find different councillors. And so I ended up like, I think the real reason is Tom Sanderson wasn't there, but lots of people, it was a very different committee than you'd normally see, because so many people had expressed a strong view and couldn't take part in debate. What are you going to say, Martin?
Can I just check that? I presume because I mean, was the decision a legal decision that was made then? Because it's not like planning. If it's just a normal council decision, that shouldn't be the case, I wouldn't have thought, unless it was a pecuniary interest.
Well, I think yes, you're right. Yeah, and I'm not an expert in the matters, but recently I found that county council is very conservative with a small c about these things and doesn't want to take any risks. And so it also happens when we're making some big changes the way we manage waste in Cambridgeshire. And those of us who are in the district councils for the same reason are eliminated from those decisions, despite the fact we're experts as well. And so it comes down to what the advice you're going to get from your monitoring officer is, doesn't it? And if they decide that that's what happens. So I was just told I'll invite to attend this meeting, so I haven't been involved in those discussions at all. But definitely it was mentioned on the day that we had a very different cohort of councillors, and I think that's the reason.
Yeah, I was wondering as well, like what happened with that. I think it's also because it was the TRO was re-advertised, so the decision was in a way like on a different decision than the previous one. However, there was, I think when we all received the advice, it was like, well, no one who commented on it before. But it's really interesting because it's difficult to define like what counts as predetermination, because for example, there are some councillors who express very strong views in favor of closing the bridge or against closing the bridge, but there's some people in the middle like myself where like it's a really kind of gray area. It's like, yes, I have commented on it because in the past I also lived around the area, but it's not like I've not been like one of the very for or against people who vocally speak about this all the time. So, and I think there's some councillors in that kind of category where at different points in the past you expressed a view towards one side, but is not a view on, yes, we should do this specific TRO, or yes, we should do it in this specific way. And therefore, yeah, it's an interesting question around what counts as predetermination. But I'm glad you went there, Stephen.
Well, no, but it was, and it's always really nice to be involved in these decisions. It's, I mean, a bit like the whole GCP stuff with the STZ, which was quite contentious, and also we've debated the C2C busway, and actually it's relatively rare. Go on.
Just before we sort of move on, it's worth, because I don't think we've said what the decision was, and the decision was to go ahead with the TRO, wasn't it?
Yeah, but it's so and I'll just really describe in the context of the meeting is that quite often we sit in front of empty galleries and nobody cares what we're doing. But these big decisions, they actually had to reconfigure the room because so many people turned up. We had 21 public speakers speaking on both sides of the debate, and it's really interesting and really it's fun. It's intellectually stimulating to be involved in a discussion like that, because I think Martin ended up defending me on Twitter this week, because I said last week I hadn't made my mind up going into the meeting, and I really wanted to hear, I'd read the papers, but I wanted to hear all the representations, and the representations were really great. And so the decision that was taken in the end, I think voted for by, so as quite is often the case, it was decided completely along political lines. So all the joint administration people voted in favour of closing the bus gate, and all the Conservative opposition people voted against it. And the optics of that aren't very good, because, and I got in trouble with Steve Count, who accused me of making gestures at him, but it looks like that it's decided completely on political grounds. But then I know Martin is a man, a Conservative, man, not a member, but you're a Conservative, and your view was quite strongly that we should have opened the bus gate. And so it looks like everybody's whipped into making a decision, but I'm not sure that's the case. I think, having listened to the debate, it wasn't a very difficult decision for me to make. And also having read the papers, and if you looked at the papers, the consultation was very thorough, and they'd mapped out the consultation responses in different wards of Cambridge, and you could see close to the bus gate and close to Mill Road, people were not overwhelmingly, but decisively in favour of shutting the bus gate. And the further away you got from Mill Road, people were more and more against it, because people are using it as a commuter, cut through. And for me, that's and listening to all the arguments, that's the most decisive argument. If we're going to make decisions for local people, we should put local people's views first, I think. And this is it's almost like the opposite of NIMBYism. They wanted it to be restored to a proper, thriving, not pedestrianised, but pedestrian-friendly community centre. And for me, it was an easy decision to make. And since the decision, I've had I spoke in a debate. I wasn't intended to speak in a debate, but Steve Count made quite a long and passionate argument against closing it. But I challenged some of the data he was using, because one of the big arguments against it is if you stop the traffic in Mill Road, it's going to appear somewhere else, which seems like a sensible thing. But if you look at all of the kind of empirical evidence, there's not any evidence that really happens. So when you shut a road, there's something called traffic evaporation, and because I guess inconvenience increases, people adopt different modes of transport. And so for me, I mean, so I voted in favour of closing the bus gate. It was a very easy decision for me, but one, you know, which I took very carefully.
Do you know, it's interesting that, because it is that classic thing of having to balance competing interests. You know, people who live, you know, we've got people in the immediate vicinity have got, you know, are using that piece of infrastructure in one particular way, or that area in one particular way. Then there's other people going there who are using it in a different way, and those are, you know, okay, they're traveling through because it's a convenient route. You know, it's, I don't know, it's an interesting one. I mean
the point is about all these things that they're not easy, and for me, it was about the thing that Alex talked about earlier on, and you talked about earlier on, the character of Mill Road, and what Mill Road is about, and how you preserve that character, because it is quite unique, and it's a unique part of Cambridge. And to me, you know, this is the way of preserving it, and they're not easy decisions, but I think councils and councillors should respect the fact that people, whichever side they vote, they make tough decisions, even if it's with a party whip. And I know in your case it wasn't, and you've got, you know, you have in the past voted against the administration as an independent as well. So there's evidence to say you're not. And I just felt that intervention was a little bit unfair, because they're never easy, these decisions. And you know that you're going to upset somebody whichever way you vote. But that's why you're a community leader, because you're willing to look at the evidence and make a decision.
Yeah, thank you. And it's interesting looking at the people who voted against, who were exclusively Conservative, that all of them are from, you know, the east of the council, because that's the political makeup of the county these days. They're all from the east and not directly impacted by this. And exactly the same thing can be levelled at me, because I'm from the west, yeah, and I'm not really impacted by this decision. But it's just very interesting that a group of people who are not really involved in that community were the people voting against it, which is fair enough, and that's what we have to do as a county councillor. But you know, as the split of it was, you know, it was very decisive.
Actually, I've realised I do know where it is, because there's a pub there called the Earl of Beaconsfield that I've been to.
Well, maybe we should all get the bus there one day and sit in the pub and talk about stuff. That would be good, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be good.
Yeah, just to say as well, like on the decision, before move on to the next topic, I think what's really interesting with those, like, you know, when people say like, well, everyone votes with the whip, or like people are predetermined, even if so many efforts are made. So no one who commented in the past is even on the committee. Is how this really doesn't apply to other decisions which can be seen as controversial. So for me, being on highways as a substitute, because I'm not normally a member, like the meeting before the special meeting, Steve, when you're in, was really fascinating how on 20 mile an hour, which is really like, you know, a politicized topic, let's face it, across the UK, not only here, like in some, you know, when the Fulbourn scheme came up, and it was a very similar, I feel, to it, that people, like, you know, in the consultation were overall in favor. Some people from the community came to committee, spoke in favor, the parish council and so on. Then the opposition actually said, and it was like really interesting, like one of them said, oh, it's quite clear that the local people want this, we should like definitely vote for this scheme. Whereas, you know, when St. Ives 20 mile an hour scheme came to discussion, it was actually split. Some opposition voted for, some abstained, and I think some against. I think it was like quite a mix. Whereas because Mill Road has been, I think, such a politicized issue, I think that like kind of temptation to like be, you know, seen as a more united argument is stronger than some of the other stuff where people actually, like, you know, vote in different ways, or even vote for some of the 20 mile an hour schemes, regardless of the overwhelming war on motorists kind of argument or debate.
I mean, I have a thing about the war on motorists, because you could counter that every time you support a motorist, you oppose a cyclist and you oppose a walker, and so you know, and when you consider how cycling and active travel methods are being promoted and are developing in terms of technology and everything else, you know, there's a strong argument to say actually rebalancing a little bit is needed, because otherwise people are not going to have the options of using these new technologies and stuff that are emerging. There's something else that's interesting. There's this comment which I don't know if anybody can put up from Anthony, about the fact that, early days in the GCP, and this was my frustration about the GCP in early days as well, and to a certain extent now as well, which is about how people were critical of the inability to make decisions on road projects. And that to me is the most important part of it. Early days of the GCP, it was really hard for them to make any progress because of basically the politics of the GCP. And as a reality, it's that thing. Councillors are there to make decisions, and this is an example of one that probably should have been made a long time ago.
Yeah. Actually, there's a comment there from Anthony. If you do have any comments or thoughts, do please put them there. Most of them appear on the chat and we can see them. And we should probably have Anthony on the show at some point.
I'd love to have him on.
That would be good. Well, I'll send you a message, Anthony.
Cambridge. So, do you know? Sorry. Do you know Chris Howell, Martin, as well?
I do know Chris. Yeah.
I think he was one of the. So there was. We recently elected a Conservative councillor back to City Council again, but who didn't last very long because he changed back to being Labour. But Chris was like the last probably genuine Conservative to be on Cambridge City Council, and he said Conservative county council's behaviour over the Mill Road Bridge filter has been dreadful. Years in, they kept demanding more and more process and consultation to drag out what should have been a simple, if controversial, democratic decision they didn't like. They should be doing better than that, which I thought was a really interesting comment from a city Conservative rather than from an East Cambs Fendon Conservative.
Just to provide some political balance to that, though, Stephen, in the early days of the GCP, the political balance was very different. And actually the same thing was happening in reverse.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
just for the correct factual, just the factual thing. There is indeed one Conservative on the City Council. So
where is that?
They still have one, Delaware Hussein from King's Hedges. So he didn't switch back to Labour.
There was one guy that switched, wasn't there? Was that a different one?
In the past, I think so. But there's one Conservative elected.
Okay, I'm sorry. What was his name again?
It's Delaware Hussein.
Sorry, Delaware.
King's Hedges. Yeah, just in case he might watch, and we know you are there.
So let's, as people probably know, the Conservative leadership election is ongoing. Tom Tugendhat was eliminated. So a couple of people were eliminated early doors, and then Tom Tugendhat was eliminated. But then in the round where he was eliminated, James Cleverly had topped the ballot of MPs. In the next ballot, he was eliminated and went from first to third, meaning that the two candidates remaining for leader of the Conservative Party and leader of the opposition are Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, who I think are both seen as being from the right of the Conservative Party. If only we had someone here who might have views on that, Martin.
You might have seen I've had a proper rant about this. I think I think not having somebody from the centre ground in and around that leadership debate, even though I don't think they would have won, I do think the right winger would have won. I think it does a disservice to the Conservative Party and the future of the Conservative Party, and it does a real disservice to the country as well, because the country needs to hear a one nationist debate from the Conservatives. And I am told by people that are Kemi Badenoch supporters that she's not as right-wing as she comes across. But it's more one of my concerns about Kemi Badenoch is one of the things we saw during the Conservative Party conference, that people say about her that she can pick a fight in an empty room, we saw that over her issue to do with maternity pay, where her response to the fact that she spoke unwisely, I think, rather than speaking her mind. And I think she may have misspoke herself. She tried to blame that on others. And that I have a concern. But more importantly, what I hope that comes out of her is some proper centre ground thinking about one nationism, because the isolationist debate, as an example about immigration, you know, is you know, and I consider one nationism to be something about you know, when they talk about one nation, because we're a nation, we're a country of two nations, the rich and the poor is where it comes from. And I consider that from a global perspective nowadays, because actually the world sees us, and the whole world can see what the whole world is about effectively. And so that notion of the difference between rich and poor is an international issue. And that's how I consider one nationism. But there is a real serious issue about immigration, as an example, being an international problem, and the Conservative debate being very, very isolationist in the way they want to treat with immigration. It just will not work. The only way you're going to be able to deal with immigration is by starting to recognize that it is a global problem, and that is being fed by war, by poverty, and increasingly, as we move forward, by global warming. The only way we're going to be dealing with it is to start challenging international organizations like the UN to be better, and to start managing it properly, and actually coming up with alternatives to the UN if they can't do it. Because the only, you know, that's one example of where you need this one nationist debate within the Conservative Party, and at the moment it just won't be had. And I can talk about British issues as well. The country needs to hear those debates and those arguments, and they're not going to.
No, it's not only by the Conservative Party, though, is it? Because ultimately what they're trying to do is they're trying to elect a leader who's electable by the whole country. And so I went to The Rest is Politics Live, which is Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart's podcast in Birmingham on Wednesday night. And they did like a straw poll in the audience where they asked the audience, who is probably slightly left wing, but I guess very centrist, yeah, because there's, you know, it's a political nerds podcast, and they had a vote to see who if the audience they asked the audience who they would vote for as Conservative Party leaflet, and like 95% of people said Cleverly, and you know, so it goes to show that if you want to engage with the British public, he would be a much more public choice, and neither of the other two at the moment are particularly popular or electable. I mean, that can change, like you say, but at the moment it seems like a really bad choice. And you know, Rory Stewart basically said that they've stuffed up their chances of winning the next election, which you don't think they're going to do anyway, but you know.
No, I've never felt they were. My feeling about them with the next election, well, I always felt it was really, really unlikely. My feeling with this leader is that the Conservatives were electing the leader before the next one, and not electing the next PM. But even so, you know, there needed to be a debate had, because when we come to the next leadership election, that debate should be in the back of people's minds about whether that's the way to go. There is a feeling amongst many in the Conservative Party that the fight we've got is with reform. I say we, I'm not a Conservative Party member anymore, but I consider myself a Conservative. But it's not the case. You know, the more we battle with reform, the more we move away from the centre ground. And the centre ground is where elections are won in Britain. And that historically, every piece of evidence shows that. We're abandoning it more and more. And that is a popular view within the party, that, you know, we've got to take on reform. I think reform will collapse anyway.
So,
you know, what happens when you do get a solution and immigration starts to come down, everything that reform are about starts to fold.
So there's quite a lot in there. I mean, to cover. I mean, I suppose one of the things is on immigration has become this huge issue. And I think the debate about immigration, I think, is just awful in many ways. And I think a lot of it, to be honest, is some of the stuff coming from the Conservatives, including coming from Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, has played into that. And I do really worry about. Okay, so Kemi Badenoch apparently, you know, maybe, you know, not as towards reform or more centrist than she appears. But the thing is, pandering or playing to that kind of politics is damaging in and of itself, and that you're willing to do that is a real problem. For instance, in immigration, given that, you know, how people move and why people move has changed, you'd think we'd want a different, you know, it's not unreasonable to say, okay, we need a different settlement about how immigration works. The problem is you've got at the moment, you know, people, the the debate around it is awful. Part of it is just racist, and a lot of it is really badly informed. And so you have this stuff about leaving the ECHR, Rwanda. They're just policy-wise harebrained. But then it's very difficult to say, we should look at reforming some of these huge treaties when you've got people who seem to be quite happy to pander to, frankly, the kind of politics in whose aftermath a lot of these treaties were set up.
I sort of agree. The only thing I would say is that what people need to understand historically with politics is that the way people who think of the right and indeed think of the left, the further right and the further left you go, what you start to see is argument, and it's a time when politics is seen to be failing for various other reasons. What you see is them blaming not just politics but society as well. You see them blaming the failures on society on them immigrants, and you can replace the word immigrants with whatever you want about a section of society, and that's what the extremes of politics do. And if you're speaking from the sensible centre ground, and I say that deliberately in the way I've said it, you have to provide a sensible alternative to those narratives, and it's really important. The Conservative Party are not doing that, and I don't think the Labour Party are as well enough. I mean, I saw on Question Time the other week, the first time I've seen a Conservative MP talk about the need for an international approach to immigration. And I know Keir Starmer is supposed to be meeting with a joint meeting with Biden and Germany and France in the next few days, and that's one of the things they should be sitting and talking about is international solutions. There's a lot of power in those four countries, and they can wield a lot of influence, and they're all impacted by immigration. And so they can start talking about international solutions, about how we start to deal with asylum applications upstream, as an example, rather than, because that's one of your solutions to the problem with boats.
Sure. I mean, I'm going to defer to Alex, who knows a lot more about this, I think, than the rest of us. But there is an issue, though, that it feels, and I think this isn't just the UK, but particularly with the media in the UK, it is true in other countries as well. If you say anything on immigration, which isn't immigrants and immigration are bad, you can't get a hearing, and that's and you have politicians playing into that. So, Alex, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can get a hearing, but it wouldn't work politically. I know it's really interesting because we were speaking about in the general election about people with more progressive views on immigration, whether we even mentioned this stuff on the leaflets and so on. And I was thinking no, I'll never do a leaflet and put front and center yes, this is what I think the pragmatic solutions to immigration should be from a center pragmatic perspective. Plus, by the way, I'm usually nice to people wherever they come from, because I don't think that would be what would win elections locally or nationally. However, I think what is really what's really sad in a way, with people using, for example, politicizing not only immigration but any kind of controversial or divisive topic is, yes, you're more likely to win, let's say, the leadership election or or some elections in some cases, you see, for example, Nigel Farage and reform, and how, I mean, he really played the long game in getting those arguments up, but at the end of the day it worked for him. I think what's worrying from my perspective is, okay, we have, let's say, a new opposition leader who is speaking about getting involved in all sorts of controversial debates, leaving little time to actually be an effective opposition, which is needed, or actually focus on some of the issues that most people care about, because it's very tempting to, and for example, the debate around gender, which is really highly controversial. You can look at some of the views around that. I think if you actually survey people, very few people are actively involved, whereas other topics are where people are actually more interested in to get involved. So I think there's some issues that, you know, are kind of highly politicized, where at the end of the day, when you do your regular door knocking as a town councillor, David, or like people as district councillors, it doesn't really come up.
The two things. There are two things to that, though, that are important. The first one is the more and more people say we can't talk about this during an election campaign, even though it's a mainstream issue. The worse politics become. As a politician, you have an obligation to have those discussions. That's what you're there to do. And as a politician, you're sometimes there to say the unpalatable. And so that people hear it, and some it seems in a lot of cases to say that the unpalatable is the centre ground view, and it's absolutely not. And so you've got to watch that. But I would also say within the Conservative Party, and this is why Kemi Badenoch might be the right choice, certainly out of the two, I think she is. The Conservative Party needs time to examine its navel. There's no two ways about that. To do a bit of navel gazing and to think about what its future is and how it is. And I think Kemi Badenoch is more likely to do that. And so from that perspective, they need to be a bit more internalised than spending the time just saying no to everything that the Labour government are trying to do. The country needs a Conservative Party to reinvent itself, and it's not going to do that without some debate. And if you think about Keir Starmer and the way he came to power, he sold himself as a lot more left-wing to the Labour membership than he did when he went to the electorate during a general election. And there is a hope, and this is the vain hope that I get out of Kemi Badenoch, that's what she will plan to do. I don't see it from Robert Jenrick, not at all. But I hope when she comes in, the first thing she does a complete policy examination for the Conservative Party and drives the debate from a centre ground perspective. I truly pray that's the case, because we really need it.
Yeah, I think in a way now, like with Jenrick or Badenoch, I think like I'm siding more, like, I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but I actually think like Kemi Badenoch is more honest, like in her approach, because at least, okay, if I hear like she's saying something I strongly disagree, I know like it comes from a different approach than, for example, the debate on immigration. Some of the stuff that's said by Jenrick, and I'm like thinking like, well, you were like in the Home Office, and you're speaking about some things that like when you are actually in the position to do them, you haven't really done them already. So I think it's difficult when you have that experience. In a way, it's good to have that experience, but then you're always held to account in terms of what you didn't do in the past in that position.
But it's also Robert Jenrick's approach to say, his I think one of his strap lines is about change, and yet he's talking about Rwanda. He's talking about stop the boats. He's talking about withdrawal from the EHCR. ECHR, I can't remember. Anyway, he's talking about those things. That's not change. That's the same Conservatives.
Yeah. All right, last one quickly on that. Who do you think is going to win? Go around the room.
I'll start if you want. I mean, I think Kemi Badenoch will win. I don't think Robert Jenrick is genuine enough, but I've got it wrong every step. So heart ruling head, I think.
Alex?
I think Kemi Badenoch will win, but with a smaller majority than predicted. I think lots of people now think like she'll have quite like an easy win in the membership, but I think it will be more like kind of, when Liz Truss was selected, it was like, like a bit lower percentage than expected, but still, still selected.
Stephen?
So the bookmakers say Kemi Badenoch's going to win it, basically. Yeah, that's what I'd always do. Implied probabilities. So Kemi Badenoch.
I haven't checked that. I'm just thinking about from the perspective of their speeches and who is more persuasive.
You wouldn't be an engineer, would you, Stephen?
No.
And clearly, I think that democracy is going to win. Anyway, let's move.
So who do you think will win? Do you think Jenrick would win, David?
So the thing is, I don't really have good data to base it on, and my record of predicting elections is abominable. I mean, so I kind of want so I don't want to overplay this. I really don't. I think the election is probably closer than people think. And I wonder if Jenrick will be seen as a bit safer because, to be frank, Kemi's a woman, and I think there is a tendency. This isn't just a Conservative Party thing. This is a society thing. People don't like to vote for very, or being an outspoken woman can count against you in any election.
Is that why Alex didn't win the election as well?
Well,
no. I think I would if I was a man, a Conservative man.
I just want to push that and be fair to the Conservatives. You know, we've had a fair number of Conservative women leaders, and I'll push back on that. I think the Conservatives have become quite good at accepting that you've got to vote for the best candidate for the job.
So yeah, I know I take the point, and absolutely, and I'm saying this isn't just something, like this is a societal thing, but if there are some people who will not, and there is unconscious bias, and I wonder if that will play a role. I may be overstating it.
I think there is some unconscious bias, but I think it won't be. I think it's like a smaller percentage of people now, definitely, than they were in the past, and that's why I was seeing a poll. I saw a poll of Conservative Party members that asked what's important for you in the next leader. And actually the first thing that came up, which was really interesting, was, their values and how they present themselves over the ability to win an election. And that is like a big difference, because if you ask in the context of Keir Starmer and the leadership in the Labour Party, a lot of not everyone, of course, but many of the people selecting Keir were like, well, he's someone who has the ability to win an election, rather than I completely align with the values. So if you take a more I want someone who speaks for me and more aligns with my values, which is really interesting, what tops the Conservative Party membership thinking around the next leader now. I think that's how actually someone like Kemi could win quite significantly, because you get kind of that sense from her. I'm not in the, but if I was in the party on that special, on that wing of the party, you kind of relate. Whereas with Jenrick, you have all the past things he's done in government and all the other questions around it's not a fresh approach to the party, and perhaps it's one that some people can trust a bit less, given he's been there for a while, and some of the things that he's done or not done in the past perhaps contradicts some of the things he's promising now, whereas Kemi doesn't have that issue. So it will be very interesting indeed.
Let's move on. We've had the launch this week of the Cambridgeshire Poverty Commission. Alex, I think you were at the launch.
Yes, so on Tuesday, the County Council launched the Poverty Commission. It was at Commemoration Hall, the launch, and the leader of our council, Lucy Netzinga, spoke at the launch, as well as our lead officers, and we had a panel with some of the commissioners. So basically I tried to explain what it involves because there are many layers to it. But even just short before I was elected, but shortly after I was elected on the council, there was those conversations around on initiatives to address poverty. Often the approach, and that's not a criticism to this council or this area, across the UK, is to offer short-term solutions, such as let's invest in some vouchers, or let's invest in this kind of short-term contract support. So we address this immediate needs. So we address this the kind of people who are really, really needing at this moment. However, what usually happens is that the money finishes, or you don't have it in the budget next time, or you have it in a different form, not for the same people, and it's very difficult to actually address the long-term causes of poverty, and especially to focus on schemes instead of giving perhaps some vouchers through the household support fund. Again, it's a national thing which got extended. Maybe you should focus more, and we do partly some of the money of the household support fund, we put it into working with citizens advice and Age UK and income maximizing. But instead of having this approach, the short-term approach, looking at how we can longer term plan for this, and how our asks in terms of budgets can work with that. So that was kind of like the idea, and I was always very strongly in the group of people of like, no, like those short term like things wouldn't help people in the long term. But then we also ask, okay, who makes those decisions? Who actually proposes what could be effective in terms of spending our budget for anti-poverty initiatives? So that's how the idea of the commission was created, because we thought, instead of like us, like, I don't know, us counselors and officers writing a strategy through the communities directorate or the strategy and partnerships directorate, just being like, this is what we think we should do to address poverty in the county. We should actually flip the power balance and say we have, like in this case, 11 commissioners, all from different sectors, different experiences, to gather the evidence, to listen to people with lived experience of poverty. So we have another agency doing some meetings, some focus groups with people with lived experience of poverty. And then they, as commissioners, the 11 people, actually write the recommendations for not only the council but partner agencies, because this is really like a multi-agency work. It's not like only the council or one council addressing poverty. So that's kind of the thinking behind it. I'll put a link in the comments. It says there's a page on the council website with all the commissioners, and it's really like quite interesting to see how much experience they have collectively and how some, how they worked with different groups in the past. So I really hope this is like, at least, we are trying how to make policy a bit differently and kind of move away from that. Okay, we're in the budget cycle now. How can I allocate as much money as possible, given the massive cuts that need to be made again for another short-term initiative to address immediate need, and then not sort out very little in the long term, really. So yeah, thank you, Stephen. So the link is there, so you can have a look. So that's it, really. Like, we were at the launch. It was really lovely to meet some of the commissioners and hear about their personal as well as professional experiences in this. And it's quite a short time frame, so they will have a few months. So I think until early 2025 to come up with the recommendations.
So can I ask the first question and be a cynic? Yeah. I'm not a cynic. I just the need to resolve and deal with poverty, and the need to start thinking, and the principles which I think the Conservatives would talk about it being, giving people a hand up rather than a handout, is probably sort of the approach. My thing is, how confident are you that Cambridgeshire as an entity, and I know it'll be working with others as well, can actually make a difference with poverty, given A, the lack of devolution, first of all, and B, the lack of funding, because there is a danger that if you are diverting funds away from the Household Support Fund, that some of the immediate short-term needs of some people seriously in need are not going to be met.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this is kind of the strategy commission. So I think it was announced in the last year's budget, there's like an anti-poverty work allocation in the budget. So it wouldn't be taking other money that is needed for other things and already allocated. However, I think, I mean, it's an interesting question about devolution. For me, I think at least part of the answer is how we work with the voluntary sector, because when I was looking at some of the partnership with Age UK and Citizens Advice, and how much more, how you put some investment and how much more you get in income maximization, and like you maybe put £100 in and they manage to get like £400 back for people for those income maximization schemes. That's something that's not done at a large scale enough. I think we have some partnerships, but not everyone that could benefit, who could benefits from it. So that's what also it was said in the in the panel. We had a panel with the commissioners, and we touched on this question around how councils involve the voluntary sector in a meaningful way, not only saying, well, you deal with the crisis, but actually diverting some of the funds more effectively, perhaps towards them. I also think some of the work, I'm not so sure in this anti-poverty space, because the funding is not great in this area, but I think in a lot of the spaces in local services, work can be duplicated if you don't have this kind of like county-wide strategy. One of the things we're trying to do as a parallel with migration, our migration officer at the county, is to actually map who is doing, we don't even have the mapping of which organization is doing which work and where. Is it like, immigration advice, is it support, is it cultural events, to be actually, so we don't duplicate the work, and we can get organizations to work a bit better together. So yeah, I think part of these questions around like how the voluntary sector is funded at the moment, because at the end of the day, there are where people ask for help, and also like it's an interesting question around library spaces or community space or other council buildings, and how some of those the support could be integrated more effectively there, rather than people going to the district council necessarily, or the job center and so on.
Doesn't it come into, isn't the question this, is do you spend your money on alleviating the symptoms of poverty, or do you spend your money trying to prevent it happening in the first place? It's like that whole thing about if you're standing by a riverbank and babies keep on floating by, what do? Do you fish the babies out of the river, or do you try and get upstream and work out who's throwing them in the first place? And I think that's the big question, isn't it? Is lots of what we've been doing previously with the food vouchers is just trying to alleviate the symptoms.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to be more strategic. And there's only a limited amount that the council can do, honestly.
And there's also a reality about Cambridgeshire, which is the disparity between rich and poor in Cambridge, and Cambridgeshire is huge. And we've also got places in Cambridgeshire where we've wanted to deal with this issue and deal with the issues of Cambridgeshire as far as deprivation is concerned. We've been wanting to and trying to for decades. And so, anything new that approaches that and looks at that has got to be a good thing. It's just, it goes on to, if we get a chance, the thing we're going to talk about next, which is devolution, and giving the council a little bit more flexibility, or enabling councils to have more flexibility in how and what they spend the money on, would enable more of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a sorry, what I was going to say just to Alex, I think as well as avoiding the duplication, it's avoiding the desert. There are some places where there isn't, good provision in some areas. I think this is one of the issues with, it can be more effective to work with third sector partners, or whatever, but you can then get gaps, and you need to be to be aware of that. So it's really good that that's happening. But I think, Stephen, this is, you're saying about, do you fish the babies out of the river, or do you go and find out who's chucking the babies into the river? You've got to do both.
Babies in the river.
Yeah. It's the need, it's not the use.
Yeah. So and you've got to do both. The problem is, while you're going upstream to find out who's chucking the babies in the river, there's babies floating past, and this is getting really macabre. but it's that's hard, and there is this thing. I mean, I think the idea of and there's some good people on the commission as well. There's a couple of people I know, Tracy Hyland, James Lewis, are good people who I think do actually have a lot of relevant experience, and will be really good. But it is hard to do, but that's going on.
Yeah, my fear is they will come up with recommendations that we're not able to implement, and it would be a shame. But it's also nice to have those recommendations sat there, so you can use every bit of government funding you get, and you've got bits that are oven ready. And I think that, to me, is where the value will come from, because it would surprise me if sometime in the next few years the Labour Party didn't start to do this, because it's part of the Labour Party's ethos.
So the thing is, there is a call for evidence, which is linked on the website, and so I'll read out what it says. The Poverty Strategy Commission has been set up to build consensus locally around how best to tackle poverty in Cambridgeshire. It'll explore both local and national factors and hear from both professionals working in this area and those with a lived experience of poverty. To inform the development of this strategy, the Commission is starting by gathering research, data and thought about poverty for a wide range of organisations and people as part of this call for evidence. Please use this form to share any evidence you or your organisation has been involved in, or that you're aware of, that articulates or meets the following criteria. evidence on UK-based work from the past 10 years, evidence about the problems that people in poverty have told you about and solutions, evidence that has been co-produced by those affected by poverty, evidence that resulted from a process that gave people affected by poverty the opportunity to discuss and reflect on their experience, evidence that was produced to achieve positive change for people affected by poverty. So, that's the that's the what's being covered, and that's
If I was to make a desperate plea, it's to remember that it's the word Cambridgeshire and not Cambridge with this. It's really, really important that those areas of Cambridgeshire that have poverty and deprivation within them, and I'm thinking about Wisbech in particular, are not forgotten in this, because their issues are, to a certain extent, very different to what the issues in Cambridge are. And
well, I think it's interesting because you've got. I very much agree, because you've got the sort of city poverty that you get in Cambridge and Peterborough, then small town, market towns, where you've got particular areas, and then rural poverty. And actually, the causes, the drivers, the solutions. Obviously, there are commonalities, obviously, but there's actually quite a lot of, as you say, variation within the Shire.
Yeah, Devin, just to say on that, that's part of the the agency called Resolve Poverty, that we are what they will do, like the lived experience work for the commissioners, and that evidence will be taken into account by the commissioners' recommendations, and they're planning to do at least one conversation with, I'm not sure what format it will be in, but one conversation with residents in each of the districts. So that's like kind of like the baseline, plus in addition, obviously, the call for evidence. Any organization, anyone working with people in any district can submit those. So I hope I'll try to promote this a bit more. Some of the local groups as well. Like, I hope organizations working across the different districts will send some of their thoughts or some of their challenges, whether they're working in Wisbech or in Huntington or in Ely, to inform the commissioners about that. But at the very least, there will be like one group discussion with people in each of the districts. It's quite a short time for me. If you think about this, like January 2025 is when the report will come out, and having worked on co-production and lived experience research before, I definitely had a project longer than a few months. But we'll see how it goes.
Let's move on to the last issue, if we may. This is an article from Sam Friedman, from the Sam Friedman blog. I'm going to post a link now. Now it's posted. It's oops, I put it in the wrong place. So I'm posting that now. And it was done on Labour Together, but it's not a massively partisan Labour thing. No, it's on a section called Public Service Reform and Devolution. And the title is How Mayors and Combined Authorities Can Help Deliver Labour's Public Services Missions. And there's a few things in there which I mean, this is very much speaking to my thing. And my thanks to Stuart Locke, who we had on before, who made me aware of this. I think it's a really interesting article. This is to go with I think it's with a book that he's got coming out. But the argument basically is that we are a very centralised country in the UK and have become more centralised. Councils have had their funding from central government cut and have very limited tax raising powers. And at the same time, the demand for services they provide has gone up. The result is that discretionary funding has basically gone, and they're increasingly used to direct things for central government. And then looking at the mayoralties, their role largely so far has been economic, and so their responsibilities are things like transport, skills and development. But the argument is that some places, Greater Manchester, West Mid, South Yorks, have been able to get more involved in other things, and it's sort of learning from that. What should we do to make on the basis that's good and could be better? And he comes out with 5 ideas, which I think are really interesting. one is unifying powers through the mayors. So, for instance, the police and crime commissioner, making that the same, where you have a mayoralty, make them the same person or the same body. Or for integrated care systems, have that attached to the mayoralty. The second one is first refusal for delivery of new programs. So where a new program is being developed, is being done, should that be, the first people who are offered to do that is the mayor and combined authority. The third one is devolve flexible funding. So this, I'll just read it out. The single or integrated settlements which give department style budgets to leading mayoral areas are focused on economic policy areas. A public services block could be added to integrated settlements and include all the small pots, like the ones discussed in the paper, blah, 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 blah. Basically, so that you've, instead of lots of little pots which are then targeted for specific things, you're saying, here is the money for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Encourage mayoral and combined authority level commissioning and expertise in public sector reform. So basically, they become centres of expertise for their areas to help local authorities and national government commission things in their area. And then the last one is coterminous boundaries. Now, I need to be careful on this one because I can get very tedious very quickly, because I spent about 9 months of my life dealing with the different geographies of the UK and trying to match up these areas, like wards, which end up being split in all sorts of different ways. But basically saying that job centre pluses, police and probation boundaries, regional stuff from government, integrated care systems should align with mayoral boundaries. So that's the argument. It's not a long read, although the summary, and it does say we need to not overwhelm mayoralties by suddenly going, you're now a regional government, all at once. But but to develop it over time so it actually works. Thoughts?
Do you want me to start? I was waiting
for it.
Because I've ranted a bit today, but yeah, I think this is a no-brainer. I mean, everything in it is, it's the point you made early on. I don't think it's particularly party political. I think anybody that's been involved in local government of sort of any sort recognises the complete lack of devolution in this country and the impact that it has. And I think the more we can start understanding that local government has got a future, if you give it power and strength. And I think mayoralties are the way. I mean, the other thing for me is that I would add to it is I think the government need to be stronger about what they're doing with mayoralties. And at the moment, there are a number of new ones emerging. I was reading about the potential Thames Valley mayoralty in the week, which is potentially, and people of all political parties are supporting it. But I think the government need to turn around and say, you are going to have a mayoralty, you are going to have a combined authority. Now sit down and work out where and how you want that to look. Otherwise, we'll impose it on you. But the other part of that is, the reason for doing that is because we're going to devolve funding down to it, and give flexibility of funding is really important. Allow those mayoralties to make their own decisions, understand that some of those decisions will be mistakes, but learning will come from them. And absolutely, and they won't, some of the things government will say are mistakes are not mistakes, they're things that they politically disagree with as well. And just understand that diversity is really important within a proper functioning governmental system. To me, it's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Yes, I agree overall, like on the his recommendations there, but in particular one, if I can comment one specifically, is building up mayoralties as centers for commissioning, because one of the things that's really frustrating every time you're like, on a committee and you have like a paper presenting like recommissioning a service or like, giving this contract, and at least one counselor in the committee asks, have we considered the option of in-house provision? And they're like, well, it's too expensive or it's too much risk or this and that. This is an example in the article around children's homes and how Greater Manchester are running this program to have their own children's homes. And I think many of those things, not all, if they're done at a bigger scale, like a combined authority, could actually become more feasible, and then therefore reduce the reliance on for-profit companies, especially where they don't work, because in some cases they do, but in other cases it could be more efficient perhaps to have, for example, our own children's homes, or around social care or early years provision or other things as well. But it's very challenging to do it when it's split in so many local authority layers, and the arguments just don't stack up in many cases.
I agree. And on the children's homes thing, we looked when I was leader and when I was cabinet member. One of the things we were looking at was whether Cambridgeshire should do its own care homes as well, because the cost of provision from outsourcing was huge, and all those things. If one or two people try it, they may not necessarily succeed for a start, but you'll learn from it. You'll either learn whether it's something you can do, or you'll learn from the mistakes. And you learn from other people's mistakes. But unless these things are happening somewhere, you can't do that learning.
I mean, there's on the care homes, I think there's a particular thing where private equity has got, I'm not objecting to private provision, in say, but you've got the private equity has really got involved in it, and that's not the kind of sort of funding model you want for something where you've got really vulnerable people, and it has led to sort of asset stripping and cost cutting that's had really baleful effects. And I think doing something to address that would be good. And also you're changing just how laser focused you are on the profit motive, which I think could be good, and as you say, is at least worth exploring. The other one, if I may, is the coterminous boundaries. There's an issue. I'll just give you a sort of, and this goes across lots of different sort of parts of politics. Northwest Anglia NHS Foundation Trust has 3 hospitals: Hinchingbrook, Peterborough, and Stamford, which is in Lincolnshire. That actually does cause just extra administrative stuff, because you're having to deal with, Peterborough, it's not too bad because it's, used to be part of Cambridgeshire, it's within the combined authority and so on. But then having to do with Lincolnshire, which is looking in a completely different direction, actually does cause issues, because, now you're always going to have problems on the edges and boundaries wherever you draw them, but having them, and this would be quite a big reconfiguration. But look at things so that boundaries do match up. I think that point is actually quite important, and having somebody who, in a way, can sort of take some sort of, I don't know if we're expecting, we to sort of direct some of those things and have some role in, like, well, this is how we're going to do policy area X in this region. So with Cambridgeshire policing, the boundaries do match pretty much, but there are other places where they really don't, and that causes complications. And I know it sounds like a small thing, but there's actually quite a lot of just admin and time and inefficiency because of that.
Just want to make a point. You say Cambridgeshire policing matches. Yes and no, because if you look at some of the investigative services, as an example, that the police do, they are mapped across a number of police authorities.
Right. There you go. I didn't know that. There's also a thing that until relatively recently, there was a bit of Cambridgeshire in London. And it was somewhere that there was one particular pub, I think called something like the Bishop of Ely. It was technically part of Cambridgeshire, and criminals would go and have a pint, supposedly to escape the Met. I don't know if there's any truth to
Can
that.
we go and find it? Let's have a day trip to London where we find this pub, and we'll commit some criminal acts and see if we can get arrested.
Handle salmon in suspicious circumstances.
Yeah.
Anyway, this is going off topic. It's an interesting read, and I do sort of.
Can we not throw babies in rivers though?
Yeah.
No, we won't be doing that. But I think it's the other one. I just want to sort of go back to is there's a lot in the article I really like, but I think because there's lots of there is no pot of money marked. I'll give the example like Huntingdon. It doesn't exist. I've looked for it. You've got pots of money for benches and parks and so on that cover Huntingdon, and you lose that integration. When you're doing it across quite a big area like Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, that actually becomes a real issue. And I think, and it's the sort of setting of priorities from central government, and it's like, well, here's some money for whatever it happens to be, and it might be we think we can spend the money better elsewhere locally, and it's better just to like, here's the money, this is the grant, get on with it, and actually, I do genuinely think reduce the size of the centre.
Yeah.
I had a bit of a revelatory moment this week. So early this week on Twitter, there was some figures floating around about combined authority salaries, and I linked that back to James Palmer when he first before, as he was campaigning to be the mayor. He said that he was going to keep the combined authority wage budget to less than £1 million. And you look at it now and look at the staffing structure, and I think I can't remember what the amount is. It's more than £3 million, I think, that the current combined authority wage one. It's quite difficult, for those of us involved in different layers of local government and general politics. It's difficult to see what happens with that money. And so, I was a little bit critical and a bit skeptical because it's an extra layer of government. But then equally, yesterday I was lucky enough to be included as an HDC member on part of like a trade delegation for inward investment. We went up to Coventry to visit some proper high-tech businesses, and to talk to them about investing in Huntingdonshire and in Cambridgeshire, and seeing that level of discussion and that level of convincing big companies to come here, with senior combined authority people, was just really, really impressive. And that's part of the problem. Is like, as a regular councillor or a regular resident, you don't get to see all that, and those decisions, if you can get an FEV in Coventry or JLR or somebody to build a new facility on one of our new business parks, then that makes jobs for it might only be 50 or 100 people in a facility, but it will benefit the economy by thousands of jobs. And seeing that kind of thing, you hear about trade delegations and jollies, but I've never been part of one, and it was just incredible, and I was really, really impressed by it. And so I went through this week from thinking maybe these people get paid too much money to seeing absolutely the value they bring. Well, if we can land the investment, of course, but that's part of it.
I once hosted a delegation from China when I was leader of the county council, and there's a long story. It was Children in Need Day, and I turned up at the BBC Cambridgeshire studios in a onesie, right, in a KISS onesie, and then Paul Stainton started an auction to try and get me to wear the onesie all day. And so this delegation from China,
I'm sure the Chinese would love that.
Cost me 50 quid, that did. But the trade delegations, you think from a Cambridgeshire perspective, you can take that same argument about trade delegations and think about international investment and what it means for the UK as well, to be able to bring that international investment in. It's really important.
Yeah, it is.
How much to wear your onesie next week? How much do we have to give to your marathon efforts? It's a good question.
If you want me to wear it, it's a KISS onesie, by the way. That won't surprise you. I'll wear my onesie next week if you're going to contribute to my marathon fund.
And now I'm back.
Okay. On that, I think we probably need to start rounding up. I'm just going to flash something up there. Comment I didn't see earlier from Kerry. Flexibility of funding rules with massive help with the HUG grants and help fuel poverty. The way the HUG grants are administered are really unfair. I do agree. Martin's got something to say at the end. We did have some, as you may have seen this week, some scandal in the coffee buses and politics world involving Councillor Stephen Ferguson, and we would like to apologise for this. In that he said his favourite bus this week was a tram.
Yeah,
these aren't the standards we aspire to. Sorry, somebody's going to clip that at some point. Yeah, but Stephen, you've been using trams.
So I went to Birmingham to watch The Rest is Politics live, and I was had to get the train. The train, like, I'm not a big fan of HS2, but the train between London and Birmingham, was tortuous. It seemed to be going about 2 miles an hour, and I got there. And there were no toilets in the station, so I thought the best thing I can do is, or no toilets I could access because I went through the platform. The best thing I can do is get to my hotel quickly, and so I walked out and just jumped on a tram, man, and it was just brilliant. Trams are brilliant. I mean, I think you see them in European cities, and if you're a driver, they're a bit scary because, like, you don't quite understand how they're going to act on the road. But jumping on a tram, gave them my contact details. They seemed to be quite personal. There was a driver and 2 conductors on the small tram that I was on, which I guess is great for employment, not great for automation. But it was just, I've worked and lived and grew up in parts of Birmingham all my life, and it's never been there really when I visited before, and it was just such a really, really great thing to do. And and you think, I mean, Birmingham was our second city probably, but Cambridge is bringing lots of investments. It's the sort of thing we should be out of fortune in Cambridge to have something better than just buses, I think.
Yeah.
Great.
But anyway, unless anyone else has got any other last words, Alex?
Favourite bus?
Martin, in that case, Martin.
Yeah, just same thing as last week, really, except I've put a tiny URL on so it's easier for people to access. Could you post that up, David? Because I can't.
Yeah.
But I've got, I'm running a marathon on the 27th of October, 2 days after my 60th birthday. So anybody that can throw me a few quid it's for a charity called DBAS UK, and what they're about and the reason we've supported them are in the link. But anybody that can support me, I'd really appreciate it. And apparently I'm wearing a onesie next week now. So.
I thought you should wear a onesie during the marathon. That would be that. The chafing would be horrible, wouldn't it?
And I struggle to run a marathon in running gear, and I'm not putting anything stupid on to run it. I'm telling you now.
Well, we're looking forward to next week then. My bus of the week, because Stephen cheated on the question and said the tram, is actually the number 2. So I was in near Cambridge, north, like Milton Park and Ride area, and I had a meeting at Milton Road Library. I used number 2 bus, which there, I think now all electric buses on number 2 stagecoach route in Cambridge, which was like a really good experience.
Oh, great.
Especially now that the Milton Road works are almost done. Like, actually, you didn't get stuck there for 1 hour like before, so that's great. Okay.
Well, and I've actually basically been sat here or dealing with other stuff, so I've not been on any buses. I've actually, the only bus I've been on like the last 2 weeks has been the B in and out of town, which I do like, but I keep saying the B is my favourite bus, but it probably is. Anyway, thank you all very much. As ever, do check the website, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook. Telepathic messaging is also available. If you don't know how to get the telepathic messages, send us a telepathic message and we'll give you the details. And with that, we'll see you all same time-ish next week. Bye.
Bye.